So last week I spoke about Israel's vaccine rollout and what Canada might be able to learn from their experience, but I actually want to stay on the Middle East for a little bit because I think there's a lot we can really unpack there and things that affect Canada that we don't always necessarily think about. Now, the first area I want to talk about is the energy sector, and I know that traditionally, oil prices or what goes on in the Middle East affects oil prices, and so that has a huge effect on what goes on in Canada. But I want to start in Washington actually before we jump to the Middle East because President Biden not only canceled Keystone XL but is really cracking down on fracking, and so American energy independence is possibly being threatened. But why does that have a huge effect on the Canadian economy, and what does that have to do with the Middle East? Well, it has to do with the Middle East because President Trump, as you may recall, pulled out of the Iran deal, and some news reports basically say that the U.S. will return to the nuclear court as long as Iran is complying. Now, what does that mean? That means that Iran may not face sanctions. That means that their economy might do better. That means that they may be able to refund some of the organizations and cause trouble for their neighbors, such as Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. There's an ongoing conflict in Yemen, which most Canadians are not necessarily aware of because it really hasn't been covered a lot in the mainstream media, and I think it's really an underspoken about issue there. But the issue is, again, getting close to Iran might embolden the regime, might give them new funds and reduce some of the sanctions, which will free them up to be able to cause trouble. Iran is one of the world's largest, if not the largest, state sponsor of terror and has a number of sort of covert operations trying to destabilize its neighbors. In the WikiLeaks cable, a lot of people thought that Israel was pushing hard for America to bomb Iran, and it was actually Saudi Arabia, one of the countries pushing the hardest for America to deal tough with Iran. So there's an entire coalition of surrounding countries, and this is what in many ways also pushed some of the peace deals, was the fear of sort of Iranian hegemony, Iranian overreach in that region. And so that pushed a lot of the countries together. President Biden also canceled the F-35, or at the very least put it on hold, but possibly canceled the F-35 deal to the UAE that was apparently part of the Israel peace deal between Israel and the UAE, that they would be having access to buy F-35s, which we don't even have yet. We may never get. But that, again, this all really overshadows the energy sector. And it's not just, again, important because of oil prices, but it's important because the energy independence to the United States and our exports to the United States, which are now very limited except by rail, and our own energy independence because we also tend to import a number of oil from a number of countries, especially in Eastern Canada. So that is going to have a huge, huge effect on what goes on in this country, and that is really tied into what goes on in the Middle East. Now, the second area, which is tied into the first, is actually relating to this story here. And this story is about underground banks and underground money exchanges that are really funded and pushed by the Iranian regime. Now, this money laundering is basically using money to finance terror and finance the drug trade. And this is very concerning because this is happening here in Canada. Now, I'm very concerned not only because they are using our country for nefarious purposes, but also because of this, and I'll explain why. This story here, Liberal Writing Association accepted donation from accused Iranian money launderer. Now, someone who CSIS suspected of laundering money for the Iranian regime made a $240 donation to a Liberal Writing Association. Now, why am I concerned about this? Now, you may think it's because the $240 donation, maybe buying some access or that kind of thing. Now, I don't think $240 buys you access. But I think what this does show is that the road from money laundering to political interference is actually very short and possibly easily driven, because when you have a lot of dirty money lying around, it's very easy to find purposes and things to do with that money, especially since you've got to get rid of it somehow. And, look, might as well buy some political favor while you're at it if you have to dump some cash. So a couple things out of the Middle East that are very concerning. Now, overall, I think, the Middle East is it's a different world than Canada in many ways. And I think we can safely say that if Eastern Canada has a different culture than Western Canada, or, Toronto has a very different culture than Western Canada or than Quebec, I think it's very safe to say that the Middle East has a very different culture than Canada. And so I really think it is worth reading about, worth exploring, but also remembering that things work very differently in that part of the world. And I think a lot of times people tend to get caught up in and sort of the preconceptions that we have here. Now, I not only have a background in the Middle East, but I've also studied the Middle East extensively, and so I hope to bring you some of that information that we can unpack about why that is relevant to Canadians. But I think it is very important to remember that our already beleaguered energy sector can be greatly affected by what goes on in the Middle East, and not just because of oil prices, but greatly affected about the ongoing issues in the Middle East, and also that the Canadian government is not necessarily immune from foreign interference, especially from nefarious actors such as the Iranian regime. So, again, as always, a lot of stuff to think about. Still trying to work on a Middle East explainer video for you, just really trying to find that format, that place to really, push that out and under what context, but definitely still working on things like that, as I know a lot of you have requested it in the comments. But as always, for True North, I am Sam Eskenasi. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something about the Middle East. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with all the latest and greatest from True North. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.